Whistler. I'm representing Free IT Athens, the organization that brought Richard Stallman here this evening. This event was funded by generous donors and organized by a dedicated group of people to get Dr. Stallman here tonight. For those of you who are aware, Free IT Athens, we're a local, small, grassroots nonprofit organization run by volunteers. We aim to prevent e-waste, reduce the digital divide, and promote the use of free software through computer reuse and recycling. If it were not for the efforts of our guests tonight, Free IT Athens and other collectives throughout the United States would not exist. The hard work and passion of the work of Dr. Stallman and other free software activists around the world has helped individuals, groups, communities, and organizations fight for a more just society, digital and analog. For more information on Free IT Athens, visit freeitathens.org. It's a great honor and gratitude tonight for me to introduce Dr. Stallman. I will give a brief biographical, and then...
You don't actually have to.
You don't think so? All right.
Please raise your hands if you cannot hear me. I guess. That's no good. Somebody raised a hand. How did that happen? Maybe he's just displaying the hacker spirit. So I want to start with some requests for you. First, if you take a photo of me, please do not put it in Facebook or Instagram. Facebook is a monstrous surveillance engine, and if you put the photo of someone in Facebook, you are giving it one more way to surveil people. Please don't do that to me, and I suggest you not do that to your friends. In fact, you really shouldn't you shouldn't say anything about your friends to Facebook. In fact, if you really want to be wise, you won't say anything about yourself to Facebook either. Why be a user of Facebook? But at least don't put photos of me in Facebook. It does face recognition, you know. And if you want to make a recording, audio, or video of this speech, please, and you want to distribute copies, please do so only in the formats that are friendly to free software. Those are the OGG formats or the WebM format. Please not in MP anything, because those formats are patented, and especially not in Flash. It's very bad for any website to have Flash, and you should complain if you find one. And thus, don't put it in YouTube, because YouTube distributes MPEG-4 wrapped in Flash. And also don't distribute in Windows Media Player, QuickTime, or Real Player. Also, make sure it's possible to download a copy from the distribution site without running any non-free JavaScript code. So don't put it in YouTube. YouTube's HTML5 option requires non-free JavaScript code or it doesn't work. And please put on the recording the Creative Commons No Derivatives license, because this is a presentation of a point of view. Now, this speech is not sponsored by the University of Georgia, which was unwilling to pay for the expenses of my coming here, which charged Free IT Athens for the use of this room. Now, you might find it surprising that the relevant academic department would not want to host a speech by a prominent exponent of the field. But that was the case. Why? I don't know. Maybe you could ask them why. You might find it amusing to ask them why. But thanks to Free IT Athens, I'm here. So I'm going to give a talk about the danger of massive surveillance of everyone. Perhaps the greatest threat posed by digital technology to our freedom. speech is, should we have more surveillance than the USSR? Because we do. We are surveilled enormously more than the citizens of the USSR were. Stalin would have loved to snoop on everyone to the extent that the US government does today. But he couldn't, because he didn't have the technology to do it automatically. He had to have people watching. And there was a limit to what fraction of the population he could put to work that way. He couldn't keep track of everything. He couldn't keep track of everywhere anybody went and listen to everything that they said. But that's where the US government is. We have had an enormous increase in surveillance that was snuck in, you might say, under the radar. And most people didn't become aware of this until a year and a half ago, when the great hero of our country, Edward Snowden, Edward Snowden, hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! We can't say this often enough, because people who are in favor of totally surveilling us, who want us to be completely under their panoptical gaze, are trying to demonize Snowden. They say that he ought to submit himself to a totally unfair trial where the arguments that he is the real patriot could not even be made in court. They want us to pretend to ourselves that they are going to protect us and that we should trust them with total knowledge of everything we do and everything we say to each other. Meanwhile, they're working hard to eliminate all forms of untracked movement and unsurveilled communication. That's what they want. They want a world in which they see absolutely everything. And that way, they could catch every criminal and every dissident and every journalist and every whistleblower. What that would do is destroy democracy. You see, the level of surveillance we have is incompatible with democracy. That's the crucial discovery I made. There is a maximum level of surveillance that can be compatible with democracy. Democracy means that the people control the state. In order for people to control what the state does, they need to be able to know what the state does. But the state loves to do things secretly. How can we control the state's policies and practices if we don't know what they are? We've got to find out, and that depends on whistleblowers. Democracy depends on whistleblowers. But the state labels whistleblowers as criminals and will go to tremendous, incredible lengths to identify them and then imprison them. So the question is, does it require the courage and planning of a Snowden to safely be a whistleblower? Can the state find the whistleblowers? Well, if the state always knows who's communicating with whom, then it can find the whistleblowers. This is why so-called metadata is so dangerous for the state to have access to. That's all it needs to identify the whistleblower. In fact, there is a former government employee in prison now because he revealed some dirty secrets to a journalist at the Associated Press. So the government got the phone records of basically all the pertinent people at the Associated Press and found who in the relevant agency showed up in those records, and then the government had identified the whistleblower. So what you see is, if the government always knows who's talking with whom, it can find and imprison all the whistleblowers, journalism doesn't function anymore, and democracy doesn't function anymore. So this presents the absolute upper limit on the level of surveillance in a democracy. It must not be possible in general for the state to know who's talking with whom. So if we want to continue to have democracy, we must knock the level of surveillance way down below that limit, well below that limit, so that in general whistleblowers are safe. Now, you might think that it's possible to solve this problem by putting legal limits on the state's access to the massive digital dossiers that are being made about all of us, although less about me than about most of you, because I take some precautions. For instance, don't be tracked, pay cash. I just about always pay cash. I don't identify myself to the businesses I deal with. That puts a lot less information in my dossier than you're putting into yours if you're using non-cash payment methods. But still, I'm sure there's a pretty big dossier about me anyway. And limiting the state's access to these dossiers, saying that the state has to get a court order to look at somebody's dossier, well, that doesn't help. The problem is that the state designates whistleblowing as a crime, and that's an excuse to look at all the dossiers that are relevant to finding a whistleblower. So we're back to the same point. It's not enough, if we want to protect whistleblowers and democracy, to limit the state's access to these dossiers. We have to prevent the dossiers from having the data to identify whistleblowers. We have to end massive digital surveillance. Now, some of the surveillance is surveillance of the internet. Surveillance of people's computing starts with the software in their own computers. If you are using non-free software, software that's not controlled by the users, it's very likely to be sending data to some company to create a digital dossier about you. At this point, I should explain what free software means. Free software means software that respects your freedom and your community. That's not the usual case. So it's free as in freedom, not free as in gratis. This question is not about price. It's not about whether you paid to get a copy or got one gratis. That's a secondary detail. This is about how the program treats you once you have a copy. It's a matter of what it is you paid to get. Something that serves you or something that gives someone else power over you. Sometimes we say Libre software, borrowing a French or Spanish word, to make it clear that we're using free in that meaning and not the meaning of gratis. Sometimes I say, think of free speech, not free beer. When a program is not free, we call it non-free, proprietary, user-subjugating software. Because every non-free program generates a system of unjust power, power of the developer over the users. It's a system of digital colonization that keeps the users divided and helpless, like any colonial system. In this case, they are divided because they're forbidden to redistribute copies of the program, and they're helpless because they don't have the source code, so they can't change it. They can't even determine independently what it really does to them. And very often it's designed to do something nasty. intentionally designed. I'm not talking about errors here. Sure, they have errors too. Every program has errors. I'm talking about intentional mistreatment of the users. So, more precisely, what does it take for a program to be free software? It means the users have the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish for whatever purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the program's source code and change it so it does your computing the way you wish it to. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies and either give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to make copies of your modified versions. Of course, freedom 1 says you can make modified versions. With freedom 3, you can also make copies of your modified versions and give or sell them to others when you wish. Why are these freedoms the crucial ones? With any program, there are 2 possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other. When the users have these 4 freedoms, the users control the program. With freedom 0 to run the program as you wish, and freedom 1 to study and change its source code, each user separately has control over this program and what it does. More precisely, each user has control over her copy. Because you can't change my copy and I can't change your copy. But this separate control is not enough. First of all, because most users are not programmers and don't know how to exercise freedom 1. But secondly, because even those who are programmers are using hundreds or thousands of programs, and nobody has the time to understand and master that source code of that many programs. So we need collective control, which means that any group of users are free to work together, exercising control over their copy of this program to make it do what they want it to do. That requires the other 2 freedoms. Freedom 2 to redistribute exact copies, and freedom 3 to distribute modified versions, which means they can pass their modified versions back and forth within the group to work together to make it do what they want, and then they can offer their version to the public. So with separate control and collective control, the users fully control the program, and that's how it should be. But if any of these freedoms is missing or insufficient, then the users do not control the program. Instead, the program controls the users. And the owner controls the program. So this non-free program is an instrument giving the owner power over the users. And that's probably why the owner developed it. To get power over somebody. That's what they want these days. You see, 30 years ago, even though proprietary software was an injustice, and that's why I started the free software movement about 30 years ago, you could expect that software developers, even if it was proprietary, would be honest in writing the code. It would be shocking for a developer to put malicious functionalities into programs. But the ethical standards have fallen through the floor, and nowadays that's standard practice. Non-free programs very often have malicious functionalities. So we call them malware. Malware means a program whose code is designed to do bad things to the users when it runs. Now this is a totally different issue from free or proprietary software. That's about how the software program is distributed. The same code could be distributed as free software or as proprietary software. Sometimes it's distributed both ways in parallel. This is totally independent of what the code does. At least philosophically independent, because in practice, it's not so independent. In practice, non-free software tends to be malware. And the reason is that the owner is nowadays fully aware of the power it exercises over people, and thus faces the constant temptation to look for ways to take advantage of those people by putting in functionalities to mistreat them. So of course, being businesses, that's what they do. In fact, they start businesses with a business plan based on malicious functionalities. That's the reason for developing the program. It will be an opportunity to mistreat people. What kinds of things do they do? Well, they spy on the users. They intentionally restrict the users and stop them from doing certain things. They have back doors, and they do censorship. And most people who use proprietary software are using known instances of proprietary malware. For instance, one proprietary package that does all four of these nasty things that you may have heard of is called Microsoft Windows. We know of spy functionalities in Windows. And then, of course, the digital handcuffs, the DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, that you can see, that it doesn't give you any command to copy certain things. It doesn't allow you to write a browser that will save certain things on disk. Why? Intentionally trying to restrict you. That's malware. Then there are the back doors. You can't see those, but we know of 3 back doors in Windows. The censorship is new in Windows 8. Censorship of applications. Microsoft imitated Apple in making Windows 8 on mobile devices forbid the user from freely installing whatever application the user wants. The users can only install applications approved by Microsoft from Microsoft's App Store. Now, this means that Windows is literally malware, and it has been for many years. Since Windows XP, some of these malicious things are in there. But in fact, one of the back doors is universal, meaning that with this back door, Microsoft has the power to forcibly change the source code. Microsoft can impose any change whatsoever. So any malicious functionality not in Windows today could be remotely installed tomorrow without asking the user's permission, of course. So Windows is universal malware. There's more malware. macOS is malware. It has digital handcuffs, DRM. But iOS, the system of the iThings, Apple's newer monsters, is much nastier. It has several kinds of spy functionalities that people have found. It has digital handcuffs, of course. It has a backdoor for remotely deleting applications without the user's consent. And Apple pioneered the censorship of applications. In fact, when the users of the iThings found ways to break the censorship and install the programs of their choice, they called it jailbreaking, effectively recognizing that these computers are designed to be jails for their users. That was the evil genius of Steve Jobs. He figured out how to design computers that are jails for their users and make them so shiny that millions of people would line up on the sidewalk to be jailed. More malware, Flash Player. It has digital handcuffs and a functionality to help websites track their visitors. Flash Player is gratis, but it's not free software. This example is instructive. It shows that being gratis is of no importance whatsoever ethically. The fact that Flash Player is gratis means Adobe does not require users to pay to be mistreated. Another example, Angry Birds is spyware. It transmits location information to companies. A really horrible example is the Amazon swindle. I'm talking about their e-reader, which swindles readers out of the traditional freedoms of readers of books. For instance, it spies. Traditionally, you could go to a bookstore and pay cash and go away with a book, and you wouldn't be in any database. But Amazon doesn't accept cash. Amazon requires users to identify themselves, so it manages a giant database listing all the books that each user has read. That is a threat to human rights. We must eliminate that database. We can't tolerate its existence anywhere. But in fact, the swindle spies on people more than that. It reports all the books that are read, whether they came from Amazon or not, and it says what page the user is reading at any time. If the user enters any notes, those get sent to Amazon too. If the user underlines anything, that gets sent to Amazon too. It's monstrous. Then there's the freedom to give the book to somebody else after you read it, or lend it to various people from time to time as you wish, or sell it to a used bookstore. Amazon eliminates these with digital restrictions mechanisms, DRM, in the swindle, and with the contracts that reject the idea of private property. Amazon says you can't own an ebook. All the ebooks belong to Amazon. In fact, that goes beyond the Soviet Union. I don't think the Soviet Union said that people couldn't own books. But Amazon does. And then there's the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish. Amazon eliminates that with a back door that can erase books remotely. We know about this by observation. In 2009, Amazon remotely deleted thousands of copies of a particular book, an Orwellian act. Somebody came to my speech once and told me that he was reading the book and it disappeared as he was reading it. And what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. Well, this was so ironic that it provoked a lot of criticism, whereupon Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. If you've read 1984, that's not very comforting. But don't worry, Amazon doesn't keep the promise anyway. It goes around deleting books whenever it sees fit. The official name of this product is the Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire. Perhaps this is meant as a hint that the real purpose of this product is remote virtual burning of people's books. But only those who are foolish enough to use such a system. Unfortunately, in general, the commercial ebook readers are just as bad. We recently discovered that Adobe Digital Edition is just as bad. It spies completely and sends back a large amount of information to Adobe in plain text so anyone else can see it too. And many public libraries use Adobe's software to lend ebooks. They should stop. It's better to do nothing than to feed tyranny like that. Libraries should have the courage to say, ebooks are not available on ethical terms, so we can't help you with them. We will not let ourselves be turned into a retail store for these vicious companies. More malware. Well, you've probably heard that parts of Android are free software, but parts are non-free. In particular, Google Play, the program that accesses the App Store, is non-free, and it has a universal backdoor. And nearly all portable phones. By the way, the swindle also has a universal backdoor. It's also known, it's called auto update. Auto update, if you can't turn it off, is a universal backdoor. Nearly all portable phones are full of malware too. Every portable phone, except for the very old analog ones, is a computer running software that can be changed. In some cases, the user can change it, but always some company can change it. And that software is malware, usually. For one thing, it will send the GPS location on remote request, and the user can't stop it. So it's spying on where you are. But it also has a universal backdoor. They can remotely change the software. This has been used to convert them into listening devices, which listen all the time and transmit all the time. And you don't have to speak into the microphone. It can hear you from way over there. And if you'd like to get some privacy, so you turn it off, it pretends to turn off, but really it keeps on listening and transmitting. We know now that the NSA has a cleverer version that listens all the time but doesn't transmit everything it hears. It checks for certain keywords so that it only transmits the interesting conversations, whatever conversations are defined as interesting by the NSA. The only way to regain your privacy is to remove all the batteries, not just the obvious big battery, but all the batteries, except that requires cutting wires. In some phones, you can't remove any batteries. I wonder why. Well, when I found this out, I concluded that a portable phone is actually Stalin's dream. That's why I don't have one. I've never had a portable phone. I refuse to carry one with me. So, what you see is proprietary software is very likely to be malware, and in particular, it's very likely to spy on you. Proprietary software is software for suckers. It does computing for suckers. But what about free software? Well, the developers of free software, the contributors to free software, we know that the users have the ultimate control, that we don't have power over them. As a result, we don't feel the same temptation. So we are not likely to try to take advantage of the users because we know that they could stop us. What happens is that the users of any free program are a community. Some of them know how to program. Some of them change the program. Some of them want to fix a bug or add a feature, so they study some of the source code. In doing that, they're checking that part of the source code. If they see anything wrong with it, they'll tell people. If they saw anything that was malicious, they would certainly tell people, and it would be a big scandal. And it would be very clear from all the development records which say who wrote each change. It would be clear who's at fault. So you couldn't expect to get away with it. It's not a matter of one person's word versus another, because any programmer could compare the various versions and determine the facts independently. So we have in free software the only known defense against malicious functionalities. It's not a perfect defense, I must admit, but it's the only defense known, and it's much better than being totally defenseless like the users of proprietary software. Every proprietary program demands blind faith. It's the only possible basis for using it, for trusting it. They refuse to offer a rational basis to trust it. That you only get in the free world. It's possible to run free software in your computer, but the Washington Post apparently thinks it shouldn't be possible. You shouldn't have that option. You should be forced to run a program with a backdoor set up for the US government. This is tyranny. It's a battle we fought in the 1990s and thought we had won. But none of these battles is ever permanently won. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And the greatest threat to our liberty comes from the government. You see, the government is very powerful. It has to be powerful in order to do its job. What that means, if it runs off the rails, it's more of a threat than anything else can be. They want us to be distracted by smaller threats like Al-Qaeda or PISI, the pseudo-Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Since most Muslims say it doesn't represent their religion, why should we serve their purposes by calling it the Islamic State? That's repeating their propaganda. So let's call it the pseudo-Islamic State. That's more accurate and gives the name PISI gives that organization the respect it deserves. But the point is, they can't do anything to us like the damage the U.S. government would do. The U.S. government has 1 million or so people under arms, and they don't even have to sneak around. They can go anywhere. Whereas any underground terrorists, by definition, have to sneak. They have to work really hard to do any damage at all. And in fact, it's been 13 years since they managed to do anything to anybody in the U.S. And if you want to hear an interesting statistic, cars killed more people in September 2001 in the U.S. than terrorists did. But the cars have repeated it every month since. Why don't we have a global war on cars? Well, it's obvious. The global war on cars would not be much of an excuse to take away our freedom. But the so-called global war on terrorism is a great excuse. It gets everybody so scared, except for a few of us who resist, that they're irrational. They can't think straight. They're ready to tear up their own freedom. We need the discipline to refuse to panic. To say, in the long run, we need our freedom and our democracy more than we need your protection from this momentary threat that probably would blow away if you didn't launch an internal war and make them focus on us. So, my recommendations require organizing. Running free software, we can do that in our own computers by ourselves. We can, at that level, we can each protect ourselves. But when we deal with surveillance in ISPs and phone companies and servers and mass transit systems and toll payment and cameras, credit cards, we can't individually make those systems not surveilled. Some of them we can refuse to use. Some of them we can avoid giving our name to. But really what we need to do is organize so that massive surveillance is rejected. So that digital systems don't collect data about anybody in the absence of a specific court order to monitor that somebody. Now this is what we did for hundreds of years. Why should we accept the idea that the government needs to surveil everybody? Why should we let that be treated as normal? It's a radical change. a radical change that threatens democracy. We should not accept it. We should tell our politicians in no uncertain terms that we won't accept it. Whether that's effective depends on whether our elections are honest.
Welcome to Georgia.
Yeah, well, in Georgia, the government is blocking 40,000 voter registrations, has been blocking them for months on a tiny technicality. You can find more information about this in stallman.org in the political notes. Please take action tomorrow for democracy in your state. So, at this point, for more information about the GNU operating system and the free software movement, look at gnu.org. In gnu.org/philosophy, you can see articles about many philosophical points. In gnu.org/licenses, you can read about which licenses are free and which licenses are not, and our recommendations on how to choose a license for your program, and various other licensing-related issues. In gnu.org/distros, you can find out about which gnu/linux distributions are free and what's wrong with the well-known distributions that are non-free. Why are they non-free? What's wrong with them? How do they fall short? And in gnu.org/help, you can see a list of ways you can help our cause. It's not just a matter of programming. Most people seem to assume that the only way to help us is by writing a program. That's not so. Actually, there are other kinds of help that are even more scarce than good free software developers. In fact, they're not so scarce. We could always use more, but there are thousands of them. Free software speakers, there are not so many of them. Organizers, we need local organizers. We need people to write manuals. Now that's, if I could have the choice of 10 programmers or one good writer, I'll pick the good writer. We have a big shortage of this. If you can write good English, we need you. You can join the Free Software Foundation at fsf.org. We need your support that way. You can also, because I'm here, pay your annual dues in cash and thus not have to use digital payment systems. You can fill out a form, pay your dues, and you'll be a member. And in fsf.org, you can also find resources for using and developing free software, information about the hardware that works with free software. You can also find campaigns, things that need to be done. Some of them you just have to sign them. Please sign them. Why not? It will only take you a few minutes. You can also visit defectivebydesign.org, which is our campaign against digital handcuffs. Now it's time for me to present my other identity. I normally only do this in speeches that are mainly about free software. But since this isn't a chapel, I just have to. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as an extensible text editor that I wrote, which became a way of life for many users, as it was extended so much they could do all their computing without ever leaving Emacs. And then it became a church with the launch of the news group, alt.religion.emacs, which you might find amusing to visit. By the way, I had nothing to do with setting up that news group except for writing Emacs. In the Church of Emacs, we have a great schism between several rival versions of Emacs, and we also have saints, but fortunately no gods. Instead of gods, we adore the one true editor, Emacs. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must pronounce the confession of the faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then, if you become a real expert, you can celebrate that with our ceremony, the Foo Bar Mitzvah, in which you chant a portion of our sacred scriptures. That is to say, the system source code. In the Church of Emacs, we have abolished the priesthood of technology because everyone is welcome to read our sacred scriptures. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs, which means anyone who has never used Emacs. According to the Church of Emacs, offering the opportunity to lose Emacs virginity is a blessed act. We also have the Emacs pilgrimage, which consists of invoking all the commands of Emacs in alphabetical order. There is a Tibetan sect which claims that it's sufficient to execute them automatically under the control of a script. But the mainstream church holds that to gain spiritual merit, you must type them by hand. The Church of Emacs has certain advantages compared with other churches I won't name. For instance, to be a saint in the Church of Emacs does not require celibacy. But it does require living a life of moral purity. You must exorcise whatever evil proprietary operating systems have possessed computers under your control. Then install a wholly free operating system. And then use and install only free software with and on the system. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint and you'll have the right to wear a halo, if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. There is a traditional rivalry between Emacs and the other editor, VI. So people sometimes ask whether in the Church of Emacs the use of VI is a sin. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast. But using a free implementation of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. In May, I went to China, and some VI users proposed to attack me. What can I say? Apparently, violence begins with VI. People sometimes ask whether my Halo is really an old computer disk. This is no computer disk, this is my Halo. But it was a computer disk in a previous existence. Thank you.